Hello, I'm Wayne Visser and I'm Director of CSR International, and I'm here today with Tom at the high-level group meeting for CSR of the EU. Tom, if you could begin by introducing yourself and then giving us an idea of what the major challenges are that you face in tackling CSR at the EU level.
My name is Tom Dodd. I'm a British national. I work for the European Commission in Brussels. I work for the European Commission's Directorate General for Enterprise and Industry, and there I'm responsible for our policy to promote corporate social responsibility. Major challenges, a number immediately spring to mind. Firstly, we're trying to promote a coherent and consistent policy on corporate social responsibility that is relevant at least to 27 member states of the European Union. And while from the outside we might sometimes look like a homogeneous bloc, the levels of development and understanding and ambition on corporate social responsibility vary wildly. We have countries like Denmark at the one end of the scale who are, I think, probably acknowledged world leaders in terms of the practice of CSR by their companies and also perhaps in terms of their government's support for the concept. And then we've got quite a lot of other countries within the European Union for whom CSR, perhaps for very good reasons, has not been very high on the policy agenda of governments, nor necessarily very high on the agenda of companies themselves. So how do we, at the centre, as it were, have a consistent set of messages and policies that are relevant to them all? That's certainly one challenge we have. Another challenge that we face constantly is how to think small first, which is our code, if you like, for making sure that any policy that we have, whether it be on CSR or not, caters to the needs and circumstances of small businesses. The dialogue on CSR is extremely different if one is talking to a large established multinational and if one is talking to a small or medium-sized enterprise of perhaps one employee, perhaps 10 employees. The language needs to be different, the reasoning needs to be different, the approach needs to be different, while all at the same time recognizing that small businesses are not less responsible than large businesses. In fact, sometimes the reverse can be true. I think another challenge, perhaps one that we're only now properly beginning to wake up to, is that our policy needs to be globally relevant. We've tended perhaps to look very much within the European Union, perhaps with good reason, but whatever we do has to be built into some kind of global architecture. It has to involve genuine discussion and exchange with other countries around the world, and it has to involve the European Union itself engaging in international processes, supporting international instruments on CSR.
Now, at the EU level, the main sort of economic strategy was the Lisbon Agenda, and that was very much about competitiveness. That had a timeline of 2010, and now there's a new Lisbon Agenda for Europe 2020. Is there a link with CSR and the competitiveness agenda?
Broadly speaking, yes. I mean, I think there are two ways of looking at it. One is the micro level. This is the classic discussion on the business case for CSR. To what extent does an attention to CSR help a company to be more successful, to be more profitable? Which is an interesting and important debate, and one to which we have contributed. The European Competitiveness Report of 2008, which is a mainstream number-crunching productivity publication, dedicated a chapter to the links between CSR and competitiveness. So it's very important, not least because it's one way of getting traction for CSR in the business community and at policy-making level. But I think we have to be aware that there will always probably be circumstances in which more CSR does not necessarily equal more profit or a more competitive company, which I suppose is another way of saying that there is a moral dimension to CSR. And I don't think we should be afraid to say that and state that, because one of the key questions is what happens to a company's commitments regarding social and environmental issues when they don't necessarily lead to immediate profit. Will the company still in those circumstances do the right thing? There's a whole other way of looking at the links between CSR and competitiveness, which is at a macro level. So we're not talking anymore about the effect of CSR on the success of an individual company, but very broadly, if we had a a particularly large number of companies in the European Union who are particularly socially and environmentally responsible, what effect does that have on the global competitive positioning of the European Union? Interestingly, Denmark, in its national policy to promote corporate social responsibility, makes the point that this is part of the global and international image of Denmark as having a reputation for responsible and green growth, which seems to me a legitimate objective, I'm sure an objective that many countries around the world would and should aspire to. Now, can we use that same kind of argumentation within Europe? I think at the macro level, this question between CSR and perhaps what we can call more broadly the good functioning of the economy rather than competitiveness as such, is intimately related to the concept of trust, and trust in businesses by voters, consumers, by us, by the citizens of any country. It seems that the financial crisis, the economic crisis, has weakened to a certain extent the trust of citizens in business. That is a systemic problem if it continues. It could, I suppose, in the worst case, contribute to undermining the social and political legitimacy of the systems that we have. If you are a business leader, it presumably is worrying if you are leading an organization that is from a group of organizations who, rightly or wrongly, are not perceived always to share the values of the society in which you operate. All that's a long way of saying that if we have more companies who pay more attention to CSR in a credible manner and in a manner that is properly coordinated with different stakeholders in society, maybe we can help to better build and rebuild trust in enterprises. And that, in turn, ought to allow us as policymakers more freedom to create the kind of business-friendly environment that will let businesses and enterprises fulfill their potential for helping to create a better quality of life for us all.
Final question, a quick one. What is making you most excited, or what is encouraging you in terms of new developments on the policy agenda on CSR in Europe?
I think the fact that we are increasingly able to engage a different number of departments and colleagues from different parts of the European Commission. I see that positively. It's also a huge challenge. Sometimes it's very frustrating, partly because of the nature of CSR, which is, if we're honest, it's a vague concept. Its exact scope and limits aren't necessarily agreed by everybody. But what we do notice is more and more colleagues dealing with other policy areas coming to us, saying we're dealing with development policy, we're dealing with trade policy, we're dealing with consumer policy. We think CSR is relevant. And I think that's a very positive development. Doesn't make life easier, but it means that, broadly speaking, we're all beginning to look in the same direction.
Well, I wish you all well, and thank you for your time today.
Thanks.
Cheers.